So good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to what is our fourth in the series of our Talking Thames Valley Sustainability. And today we're talking about technology and sustainability. And I'm delighted that our host for today is Paul Smith. Paul is Group Quality and Regulatory Affairs Director at Owen Mumford. And Paul is going to be in conversation with our guest speaker today, who is Carrie Lambert, who is Head of Sustainability at Reaction Engines. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to host this conversation. I think, as you explained, I'm responsible for quality and regulatory affairs at Owen Mumford, who is a global medical device manufacturer, but I'm also the exec responsible for sustainability. So a real key topic for us. So it's a great pleasure to be talking to Carrie this morning and kind of exploring some of the sustainability elements at Reactive Engines. Carrie, good morning. Maybe you could start with providing an overview of Reaction Engines, what the primary mission is, and what are some of the key projects you're working on that contribute to that sustainable technology?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. And I agree, this is such an important topic, so I'm really pleased to be invited to come and speak today. So I think Reaction Engines kind of represents a really nice kind of British success story in engineering, because basically it literally started sort of with three engineers sort of almost working out of a shed with a great idea. And their great idea or their great vision was around creating an engine, a propulsion system for highly reusable access into space, cost-effective access into space. And this was quite a novel idea, and they sort of started the company back in 1989. So it's what we call a very, very slow startup. But basically, there's a few kind of key elements to that idea, and I just wanted to explain a couple of them because that puts some sort of context to our technology. So one of the aspects, as I've already mentioned, is that it's highly reusable, and it's highly reusable in the way that it's basically like a hybrid between an aircraft engine and a rocket engine. And so what we're able to do by having that hybrid system is incorporate a lot of the features of aircraft engines that make them very reusable, very safe, very reliable, such as horizontal takeoff and landing. So, going out of an airport and back again using a runway to take off rather than a rocket system that sort of uses a launch pad, and being very, very reusable. So we're not sort of disposing of sort of like rocket engines after just a few uses. A key element of the sort of the engine design is the fact that the engine breathes air. So what that means is instead of carrying, say, liquid oxygen as its oxidant, which takes up a lot of kind of payload capacity in the system, we're able to take the oxygen out of the air in the atmosphere. And this is a key feature. But in order to do this, when the engine and the craft is traveling at the very high sort of Mach numbers, very, very high speeds through the atmosphere, the air is very, very hot. So to bring that into the engine and then to be able to use it within the engine, we need to be able to cool it down from around 1,000 degrees Celsius, which is sort of Mach 5 times the speed of sound conditions, down to sort of ambient or sub-zero conditions. And we need to be able to do this in a very sort of compact, lightweight, low drag way for the system to work. And so this was a kind of a key enabler of this whole engine system. This was something that Reaction Engines needed to develop. So what we did is we developed a very, very effective, very high performance heat exchanger that could run at these Mach 5 conditions. And we actually developed our own test facility to be able to test this because one didn't exist within the world. And we did this back in 2019, and we ran the tests really successfully. So there was a lot of design, IP and manufacturing, things like that around this heat exchanger technology. And then since, what we've been able to do, as well as continuing to develop that space access engine and other parts of that engine, what we've been able to do is spin out that technology for other applications. And a number of them are in the sustainability area. And I'll maybe provide a couple of examples. So a key example is when we think about future forms of aviation, and we think about things like hydrogen-powered aircraft. So whether these are engines and aircraft that use a fuel cell as their starting point, and then they take the hydrogen and then they convert that basically into electricity and they use that as its power source, or whether they say burn hydrogen directly. So in an aircraft engine that's kind of similar to today's ones, but instead of using kerosene as a fuel, you use hydrogen as a fuel. So these sorts of systems have big challenges around heat management, so taking the heat out from one place and managing it and using it usefully elsewhere. And obviously they need to be lightweight, they need to be compact, they need to be low drag. These are key characteristics of things for aircraft. And so our products, find they're a key enabler in this space. So that's very future sort of zero carbon type systems in aviation, also the next generation, so things that might use what we call sustainable aviation fuels, so the next generation of fuels that are more sustainable and more efficient type designs, but not as far sort of forward looking, say, as hydrogen systems. Another area, as an example of where our products can kind of play a key role, is around the decarbonisation of energy systems. So if we think about a lot of industrial processes, power generation, etc., often there's a lot of waste heat generated, and that waste heat isn't always usefully used for a number of reasons. Maybe heat exchangers that are around at the moment, the current sort of incumbents in the market don't have the performance, and they maybe don't have the footprint, so you wouldn't be able to retrofit them into the available space. But because our heat exchangers are much more compact and very, very high performance, we're able to kind of find solutions in some of these areas. So we're really, really pleased as a company that we're able to apply our technologies to these sorts of challenges where we think it can kind of make a real difference.
That's really interesting, and I think what's fascinating is when you explore particularly local businesses to the Thames Valley with sustainability, is kind of there's synergies between so many of them. So Owen Mumford are in a completely different industry, but as you say, Reaction Engines was formed in a shed by two engineers. Owen Mumford was formed in a shed by two moulding engineers over 70 years ago, and there's the sustainability in the heart of everything we do, innovation. So it's really good to get the synergy around different industries, different businesses, but with very key common elements. So if we kind of look, a lot of what you covered there is how Reaction Engines has developed over in the business it is. So kind of switching that round and looking at the future focus. So over the next decade, how do you see the relationship between technology and sustainability evolving?
It's a great question. I think it's a really, really interesting space. I think as we sort of look forward into the next sort of 10 years and beyond, we should be seeing hopefully a lot of change. We need a lot of change to happen to reach our net zero targets, and technologies to keep up the solution. So that's key. I think that's sort of widely acknowledged. I think in terms of how we make those sort of technology changes, I think we need to have a two-pronged approach. I think what we need to do is we need to think about the technology that we've already got around us that we know can make a meaningful difference, such as solar power, wind power, a lot of particularly the things in the energy sector, we just need to roll that out as quickly as possible so we can really start to make the difference. And that's so important. And obviously there's lots of system thinking around that, about making sure we've got the grid connections in place as quickly as we can, things like that. So we really just need to crack on with the good stuff that we know works as well as we can. Then we obviously need to bring in some more of the new, novel, innovative technology in this space. And I think this, I've given some examples of, some of the role that Reaction Engines products can play. And of course, there's lots of other technology out there as well. But when we think about the role of the new technology, I feel like, we've got this almost one chance to sort of redesign the whole kind of technology ecosystem. And I really do think it's a redesign that's going to happen between now and 2050. It needs to happen, it will happen, and that's very exciting. But we really do need to get it right. So we really need to think holistically about that system and make sure we really we design in the optimized solutions for it. So we're not too short-term in our thinking, we're not too risk averse. We do think forward, and we do think about all the implications of the design decisions we're making. And maybe if I provide an example around, say, an energy system, it can be things like, we're looking to potentially build in new fuel production plants. We're looking at building, new power generation and new industrial processes and things like that. Let's make sure we do clever things like co-locate them so that we can take, say, the waste heat from one process and use it usefully in another process for another application. That's not something that we always do at the moment, because a lot of kind of development has happened very organically, but now we've got the opportunity to design in these new systems. Let's make sure we do it in the smartest, most efficient way, because that's going to be the best for the environment. And of course, we are working with only, a certain set of resources. So we want to make, maximize the value out of them. And also, let's be honest, sort of a certain build rate. We can only develop all the power that's needed, to support all of this ecosystem at a certain rate. We want to accelerate it, but there will still be a limit on that. So we really need to make sure that we're sort of getting the most bang for the buck out of the things that we're doing, so that we're using that sort of resource as effectively as possible. So I think that's kind of a key thing for us to sort of think about going forward. And I think that we are thinking about it much, much more. But what I think sometimes the counter argument is, let's not take too much risk. Let's just get some sort of things running around new technology. But I think you've just got to be a little bit careful, because I think if you design sort of in the wrong thing, because we haven't thought holistically, we've been too risk averse, then potentially we'll be stuck with that non-optimal solution for many years to come. Whereas actually, if we take the time and we really work collaboratively, and I mean with all our partners across industry, with our political partners, we think very, very broadly, I think we can develop in these optimized solutions still with the pace that's needed. But it just takes potentially a little bit more work and a little bit more thinking. But that's sort of the vision that I've got, is to make sure we do that.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic to hear that. And I think that's the challenge for all of the businesses, is kind of, no one business is going to be able to solve the environmental impact and kind of solve sustainability challenges on their own. It's how we do it together and with a focused element. So I think lots of what you touched on there is technology advancement, risks, assuming and kind of doing things differently. So maybe how you can we can delve into a bit more about how what are some of the things you're going to do to help balance what's needed in the technological advancement with how that will impact the environment, because obviously building new plants, etc., kind of may help on one side of the scale, but has a negative impact on the other. So it's really a kind of a fine balance to try and achieve.
You're totally right. It's a balancing act. And I think when I think about my company, Reaction Engines, obviously we're quite fortunate, as I've described. We've got a lot of our technology and a lot of our products do have the ability to sort of be game changers in terms of environmental impact, so they can displace, fossil fuel based systems and or make them much more efficient, much more fuel efficient, to help with the sort of decarbonisation journey. But when we think, I guess, more broadly around these, the sort of the life cycle impacts and things like that you're alluding to, and also some of our product portfolio maybe is less aligned with sustainability goals, the way that I guess we tackle that is, well, there's a couple of kind of key things I've been putting in place in my role. One is we're introducing environmental criteria through our sort of all of our business processes. So really what this means is in terms of our commercial processes and our design processes through engineering. So what this really means is that when we sort of are presented with maybe an opportunity with a customer, we really start to evaluate, like, does this align with our values, and how can we sort of maximize the positive environmental impacts of this opportunity and minimize the negative ones? So how can we maybe influence it, and what's within our control? So even potentially if we had, say, a product in maybe the defence space or one of our other market areas where through its operational phase, it may not be able to achieve positive environmental impacts yet, we can think about the elements that we can control. So we can think about, say, the manufacturing life cycle. We can think about the sourcing of our products. We can think about the amount of travel that we do associated with that project. We can think about the end of life of that project and of that product, and we can make sure that, we potentially have the conversation with our customers and say, well, can you return that product to us so it can be recycled, or can we provide guidelines so you make sure that you recycle that, and let's make that agreement up front. So what we're aiming to do is, as I said, sort of think about the whole life cycle and influence where we can, and sort of make the right decision making all through our commercial gates and processes, and then through our sort of design, test, manufacturing, influence all those sort of life cycle stages, because I think that's the way that you can have the influence. And I think also that recognises the kind of conundrum that sometimes these things are more within your control and sometimes they're not. So you can sort of recognise your realm of control and influence that, and then try to influence outside of that where you can. The other thing we're doing that very directly relates to this and sort of interplays with this is we're now starting to do product carbon footprinting. So we've just developed our first product carbon footprinting tool last year and have generated some first results through that. And that's been really interesting. So we're able to actually quantify the impacts through these life cycle stages, understand them, understand uncertainty, understand gaps, understand all that stuff, and then start to sort of hone in on the areas where we can make the most difference and work towards making the difference.
And I think there's some really good things there and kind of picking up on some of them. So I think lots of what we've been talking about so far is that holistic view of what everybody needs to do and the bigger challenges. And I think that in itself, that then narrows down to particularly with SMEs and kind of the challenges faced by your organization, but also when you can't start talking carbon calculators and things like that, that opens up needing information and data across the whole supply chain. So picking up on some of that, what are some of the specific challenges that SMEs face with respect to building sustainability into their products and operations? Or I guess the flip side of it is kind of where there are challenges, what are the opportunities open to SMEs to kind of really flourish?
That's a really good question. I think in terms of challenges, obviously it can be quite difficult being an SME because you're kind of not at the top of the food chain always. So you are subject to sort of the bigger companies' influence, which can be really helpful, but can also sometimes be a little bit challenging. So, if you're responding to a set of requirements and a certain sort of design that they're sort of running at, say, system level, and you're providing a subsystem or a component, an element within that, you're then subject to any change that happens within that system. And that can be sometimes challenging for SMEs when they're sort of investing their own money and they're investing a lot of time and things like that. Then if suddenly the sort of the potential customer or the sort of the comes and says, oh, actually we've changed our mind about this, that can be quite challenging. So I guess the closer the kind of the collaboration, the partnership you can have, so you've got that sort of understanding and feedback, and you can try to avoid too much redesign or wasted design effort and things like that, it is really key to sort of minimizing that as much as possible. But of course we have to acknowledge that what we're doing is new stuff, so there is going to be change and flux and things like that, so that's sort of inevitable. I think linked to that is where you can have those closer collaborations and you can work with, say, your customers and your bigger partners to influence the design space as a smaller player. That can be really helpful. So, if you're sort of just given some requirements or just sort of looked at as a black box, you're never going to, get that sort of system level optimization that we've spoken about. And for us, this is really key because we feel, and we've got lots of examples of where customers have really been open in providing us much more context in which we can design. We can deliver them much more optimized solutions, and and they can sort of often redesign their whole product around our new components because they can offer such a step change to before, and they can really kind of monopolize on that. So I think it's that kind of collaboration and openness, like true openness, is really important. I guess sort of linked to this, investment, technology kind of investment levels and the timescales, particularly the high technology sort of investment, the stuff that we're doing, bringing sort of aerospace products to market. It's a high level of investment, multi-millions, very long time scales. So that can be a little bit challenging to keep your investors and people on board with. So that can be a challenge, I think, for a lot of SMEs. There can be a lack of kind of market certainty in some of this sort of net zero space. So that can be a challenge. And also, I guess, from an operational perspective, I guess an SME sometimes can have really big aspirations of what they'd like to do with their facility, but often they're tenants, so they're not able to go and put solar panels on their roof and make certain changes when they don't own that facility. So again, that's about sort of doing what you can, having the negotiations and trying to sort of influence where you can and make the changes that are within your control. But I think that can be a bit of a challenge or a constraint. But I do think SMEs are also in a great position because there are opportunities available to them. I mean, one of the kind of the key ones is, particularly if you're an SME like we are, that's sort of in its sort of growth phase, I think we're so lucky that if we're thinking about all these sustainability elements now, and building them into our kind of processes and practices and the thinking of all of our employees. As we scale up, they'll all be there. And so we sort of, rather than having to sort of retrofit the solutions, which can be very, very challenging, we can build in the right stuff, you know, almost from the beginning. So I think that's a great position to be in. And I'm really, really happy to be in that position, to have that influence early on. Another thing I guess I've come across is working and kind of trying to collaborate with some of the bigger companies. Sometimes I think it can be challenging because sustainability topics, because they are so broad, get covered by multiple people, and then each person looks after their little bit, so it doesn't have that sort of holistic view. So that can kind of impede progress, impede agility, but also means you're not always making decisions with all the information and, you know, balanced judgments, because you're sort of quite holistic. Because I'm quite lucky, you know, very small team, but, you know, I know what's going on across all the elements of sustainability. And then the third thing I guess I would say around kind of opportunities for SMEs is, I guess it's just that in my experience, I think there is a lot of willing of government bodies and politicians to listen to SMEs, actually. Like, I do think that if you take the time to voice concerns, engage, you know, speak to your MPs about what's important to your business to make it successful for your technology, to give views on, you know, what the right technical solutions may be in the space, they are actually keen to engage and listen. So I think, you know, we shouldn't underestimate the power of SMEs. I think, you know, they are that sort of the backbone of the economy. So, you know, we all kind of need to sort of take that on board and just, you know, speak up and get involved, because I do think that they are listening. So that's really good.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a couple of key points there, and that's partnerships and collaborations. And even so, Owen Mumford are not an SME by definition, but we're not that much of a large company. So lots of the challenges you've touched on, we have the same challenges. So we find our customers have got a varying focus, but those that have got sustainability demands are very open to working with us. When we look at our wider supply chain network, there's a bigger spectrum there. And as you've touched on, when you are a relatively small organization battling with some huge corporations with a supplier, it's getting that voice heard. And I think another thing that I can relate to hugely is where you talked about internal pockets of people doing different things and trying to bring them together and collaborate. So maybe we can have a look at kind of if you've got any more specific examples of how SMEs can kind of leverage on those partnerships and collaborations to kind of advance sustainability goals. And I guess there's an element of mutually advancing goals rather than focusing on just one of the two sides of the partnership.
Yeah, no, I think that's key. So I think, I mean, in terms of, I guess, bringing the technology, bringing products to market, that collaboration, that partnership is key for us. It's critical. That is our route into market. And, you know, we do this through a number of partnerships with mixtures, to be honest, of big companies and small companies, which is great, and through funding bodies. Like an example, we run a couple of programs through something called the ATI, the Aerospace Technologies Institute, and that's fantastic because that gives us, you know, a collaborative environment to actually really move our products forward and really develop them, you know, in this very, very challenging space. I think some of the other ways you can kind of leverage partnerships, I think it's something that actually you touched on earlier, is access sometimes to data as well. I think particularly when we look at, let's call it the bigger space, so when we're talking about things like Scope 3 emissions, I think it's quite a challenging area, and I think it's challenging for big companies and small companies alike, and everybody's trying to grapple with it and to work out how to kind of get good assessment, get good data around this, and how to kind of get their head around it, and then how to sort of improve it. So I think that's a big area for everybody. So it's a really good area to collaborate on. So it's an area where maybe, you know, if you're doing things like carbon footprinting, we can work together to sort of share things like conversion factors for certain sort of raw materials being processed into certain parts and things like that, because there's not as much data available as we'd like. You know, we want to refine our data, you know, improve our estimates and things like that. So I think there's a lot of value in sharing actual data, and then sort of sharing approaches in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And again, a lot of that's around your scope 3. So things like understanding your supply chain, getting the sort of the baseline and estimates of where they're at in terms of their sort of environmental journey, but then also how to kind of work together on improving it, because it's such a big challenge, and I don't think anybody has the answer. And I think these sorts of areas are really key, because often they're not kind of commercially sensitive, so we should be able to collaborate. There's no reason not to, so we really should and can. And I think the third one, something that we've had a lot of or gained a lot of value through, is being part of industrial kind of working groups, because again, they can be great avenues for sharing some of that stuff that I've already described, case studies, what works, what doesn't, data, etc. But also, I think for smaller companies, it can sort of help to provide the window into the context in which you're trying to sort of insert your products and make your changes to make sure they will be to maximize their chance of success, let's say, because small companies don't necessarily always have the resource to be reading up on all the latest policy and all the latest, everything that's happening. So they can really help to provide that breadth of knowledge so that you understand the political, context, some of the economic changes, legislative, all sorts of things, technological changes. This is a rapidly evolving space, and we need to sort of stay current with what's happening, or our technology won't be successful in the market. So I do think being part of working groups can be a really effective way to sort of maximize your knowledge space, and that's been it's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on the kind of, I guess it's the elephant in the room anytime you talk about sustainability and carbon emissions, and that's scope 3. And the thing that if anybody can solve the huge grey area that is, I think they're onto a winner. But it comes down to, if you're part of a supply chain of products or services, your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are the rest of the supply chain scope 3. So why is it really why is it that difficult to break down, when if everybody kind of looks at their own scope 1 and scope 2, it should then all fall into place? But as we know, it's never that easy. So I think a lot of what we've touched on so far has been kind of very high level kind of sustainability at kind of its biggest areas. And there's another aspect of sustainability that I think is in danger of being a little bit forgotten about, and that's local community. After all, sustainability is kind of impacting globally, but also the area around us. So I'm sure Reaction Engines are like most other businesses. You have initiatives both at a very high level, but also focused to engage with local community around your sustainability efforts. So maybe you can kind of talk us through some of those activities.
Yeah, sure. So we do a lot of local engagement around sustainability, and obviously, if we're speaking, we're focused a lot, almost primarily on the environmental aspect of sustainability, but of course it's much broader than that, because there's all the social impacts and a lot of the other sort of thinking about governance and all the other kind of key bits of the sort of E, S and G space. So actually, a lot of the outreach that we do at Reaction Engines does tend to be a little bit more along the lines of around sort of the STEM side of things, and trying to increase the diversity of employees in those fields effectively. So we do a lot of outreach into schools, lots of local events. We run sort of different activities where we have, school children sort of design sort of almost like rocket engines, hybrid type of rocket engines, and run them in a wind tunnel, and all sorts of initiatives, sharing what it's like to work at the company, sharing what we do, those sorts of things, just to really help to sort of broaden people's horizons, give them an understanding of what engineering is all about and what sort of the multitude of careers you can have in that space. So we do a lot of STEM outreach. In terms of on the environmental side, at the moment, we're tending to focus most around sort of, the vicinity of where we operate, which is in Culham in Oxfordshire. And I guess what we're sort of recognising is we've got sort of roughly just over 200 employees there on site, but we're part of a sort of a big science park. And on that science park, there's over 3,000 employees. So let's be honest, it's a numbers game. If we want to make changes around, say, commuting habits, we want to run initiatives with our employees to make some, meaningful changes, we can be so much more powerful if we band together with 3,000 people versus, the 200 odd that we've got. So I guess what we've been trying to do is reach out to kind of the landlords and other tenants on site and sort of form some initiatives where we can all band together to be more impactful. So it's things like sharing best practice when we've run an event internally with our employees, what's worked, what hasn't, sharing best practice around things like our commuting survey. I guess another example is recognising that commuting, to be honest, is a big part of our carbon footprint, looking at ways to improve that. So thinking about how can we stimulate more car sharing on site, which again helps when you can reach out between businesses to create more connections. How can we improve cycling to site? And for example, we've surveyed one of the local bike paths, which is actually in quite a deteriorated condition, is quite unsafe at the moment. So now we've sort of surveyed that, created pictures, and we're writing a letter to the local council to ask for some upgrades to be made. And again, we feel by working with others on site and other local schools and things like that that also use these paths, we can all kind of band together around this as a common theme. Hopefully we can have sort of more impact that way. So that they're the sorts of things that we kind of try to do.
That sounds excellent. And okay, so I think it's clear that you've got kind of lots of long-term ambition, lots of great innovative ideas, both in terms of technology and sustainability. So kind of maybe you can touch on some of what some of those long-term goals are, and certainly from what you've described this morning, you kind of give a good impression that you're looking to stay ahead of the trends while maintaining that commitment to sustainability. So maybe you can kind of go into a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, sure. I think it really boils down to, for us, sort of maximising our positive environmental impacts and minimising the negative ones. It's kind of as simple as that. So that's through our products, it's through our operations, and it's through the actions of our people. And I'm going to talk mostly about our products, but I do just want to say around the actions of our people, like I think it's quite an interesting point, because obviously everybody's got individual choices to make. And so our approach to this is, it is about choice. So what it's really about is about helping to kind of inform, inspire, encourage our employees to make certain decisions. And sometimes I think it's just about, providing information to help people potentially make more environmental choices should they wish to make them. So what you can recycle in your home recycling, what you can't, just information to the fore. I've put solar panels on my roof. I use this local company and this is how it works. This is how much it costs. It wasn't as hard as what we thought. Just sharing case studies, sharing data to get people kind of on board, not forcing anybody to make choices that they don't want to make, but just providing that information and help where we can. So it's a slight diversion, but I just think it's quite an important part of the equation of how we all kind of make our choices and think about our behaviours. But coming back to the question, which was around the long-term goals and staying ahead of the competition. So yeah, in terms of maximising, I guess, the positive benefits of our products, well, it's the focus around some of the products that I've already mentioned, around some of our aerospace products and our energy products. On the aerospace front, I think we have a product that's absolutely world class, and we can be a key enabler to a lot of these future systems. So it's just about literally they can't sometimes get off the ground without sort of our lightweight heat exchangers. So it's really about just understand the context of which you operate and really bringing these products to market as quickly as we can, because that's when they're going to start to have the impact. So a lot of them are sort of in development in the moment. We hopefully will be flying our first product within the next year, but we just have to sort of accelerate that journey as quickly as we can. And then I guess for some of the other products in our portfolio, which, as I said, may not naturally initially have environmentally positive impacts through their use cases, we just look at these opportunities to make them more environmentally friendly through time. So that can be some of the things I've talked about already around the supply chain, around manufacturing, but it also can be about how we transfer technology from sort of our different sectors to one another as well. So for example, our learning through some of our hydrogen heat exchanger for, say, civil aviation, we can then transfer that potentially in the future onto some of our defence products. So some of it's also the technology transfer, which is something we should be doing generally as people developing technology, getting the most sort of return on our investment. So it's things like that. In terms of, I guess, the staying ahead of the competition, it's obviously about operate sort of moving forward with pace. But I think it also comes back to making the right decisions by making sure that you're designing in context. So as we've talked about, technically, politically, there's lots of elements of the landscape that is changing as we work towards net zero. So just making sure we kind of keep cognizant of that, so we have the greatest sort of probability of success with our products, let's say.
Great. And I think when you kind of talked about the people aspect and kind of internal messaging, I think that's a really good kind of tangent to build into the answer, because if you get the right people and they kind of are focused and exposed to that sort of messaging all the time, all of a sudden it becomes part of the DNA, and people will want to work and stay with reaction engines because they know the sustainability is central to what you do. And then when you're looking to bring products to market that have that sustainability element quicker, or kind of building the innovation, because you've got the people that live and breathe there, you're just going to get the competitive edge, because it's not something they have to think about. It's there because they believe in it in the same way that the business does. So I think that was kind of a really good, interesting point to build in there. I think kind of moving to sum up and kind of going back at quite high level again, it seems that you and Reaction Engines have got a really good grasp of kind of how to build sustainability in everything you do. So what advice would you give to other companies looking to improve sustainability, particularly through the technology that they work in?
So that's a big one. I think, to be honest, quite a few of the things I would give advice on are things I've probably touched on already, but I'm going to kind of reiterate some of them then. I think it's really important with any technology that you're very clear on what your USPs, your unique selling points are. And I guess the more that you can quantify these and make them kind of as clear and compelling as possible, that's really, really important. I think linked to that now is understanding the environmental impacts of your products wherever you can. So even if you haven't been able to do a full carbon footprint of all, and understood all your waste sources, end to end and things like that, which might be a too big an undertaking, depending on where you're at and what resources you've got available, at least starting to have an awareness of what your impacts could be, what the risks are, what could become a challenge for you is really important. And, in my experience, and I think speaking to others, this is becoming more and more important to everybody. That's the sort of questions your customers are going to ask you. Have you thought about this? Is there any risk that you're using a metal, from a conflict zone? How are you going to demonstrate that you're not? These are big, hard questions, but, we need to be grappling with them, because these are the sorts of things that, everybody is worrying about, needs to be worrying about. So I think making sure, again, you're sort of thinking about these kind of holistic impacts is really important, and showing that you're working towards solutions. We don't, you may not have all the answers yet. Nobody, I think, does, but that's okay. But just being aware of what the issues are, that, that awareness is kind of the first step, isn't it? And then you're working, you're on the journey. So that's really important. I think, again, with a lot of developing particularly sort of novel, innovative technology into this kind of new technology space, you need to have a clear sort of design, verification, development route that you can kind of outline and to bring all your stakeholders on board with. But I also think it is important that you keep everybody's eyes open about the fact that, you're doing new things. There's going to be iterations, there's going to be some failings along the way, but you can deal with it, and you work some of that into the plan so that, you've still got a good sort of a journey to success, but you're going to expect a few sort of diversions and things along the way, because that's part of it. So it's just sort of having a realistic discussion and agreement about the approach you take, clarity, but then also like realistic expectations, because this is new stuff, it's novel and it's challenging, but that's what we're doing. And then I guess the third bit is, again, something probably I've already touched on, but it's about, really trying to understand the context in which you're trying to insert your kind of product and technology, like just thinking holistically thinking about the best technical solutions and understanding that emerging landscape, what's happening economically, what's happening politically, because unfortunately you can have the best technical solution, but if the other elements of the environment aren't right for it, then it won't succeed. So you do have to kind of be thinking about all of these sorts of factors. And you know, this is changing, and you know, let's be honest as well. We talk a lot around mitigating climate change, but we're actually experiencing it as well. So we also have to be coming to grips with how do we operate our products in this very changing environment with more adverse weather conditions and different, you know, so many new challenges that are going to come through over the next sort of, well, they're happening now, but, you know, are going to be exuberated over the next sort of years and decades. So I think it's just, yeah, being sort of totally aware of this context to sort of make sure you can be successful, really.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up well there. So kind of every journey starts with a few small steps, and you're never going to move forward if you don't start taking those small steps. And as you say, sometimes you fall over, you pick yourself up and kind of carry on the journey either in a different direction, doing things differently, and kind of building that momentum. So fascinated and really, really positive to hear kind of the enthusiasm and a lot of the good stuff and the foundations that seem core to what reaction engines are doing. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, and kind of best of luck moving forward with the technology and sustainability, because I think there's definitely a kind of a winning case there for you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you.